streets.
James Freeze. Ben Chambers. Roy Stolzenberg.
Present.
Kevin McDermott.
And
Sorry.
he's in the Virgin Islands right now.
Okay. Jessica Hirsch Bauer. Albert Karina Plum.
Present.
Luis Carazon. Charles Proctor.
I'm here.
Michael Barnes. Christine Jacobs.
Here.
Zadie Lacy. Bill Palmer.
Right here.
Juwan Lee.
Here.
Wood Hudson.
Here.
Sarah Pennington.
Present.
Richard Durant. Sandy Shackelford.
Here.
Lucinda Shannon.
Here.
Gretchen Thomas.
Here.
Tony Choi. Donna Chen. You do have a thing.
All right, thanks. Just wanted to start off today by acknowledging that 2 people lost their lives on our MPO streets this weekend. A brief moment of silence to reflect on that. All right, thanks. First up, we have matters from the public. Do you have any members of the public who would like to speak? Doesn't look like we do. All right, next up, journal administration. We don't have any modifications to the agenda, so don't even vote to accept it right now. All right, we have minutes from our November 15th meeting. Do we have a motion to accept them? A motion. All right, we have a motion from Michael Barnes, a second from Ben. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? And I will abstain.
I will abstain.
Because I did not hear anything.
Sorry, the owl video is not streaming. So.
Oh, gotcha.
Thank you, Christine.
Great. Sandy, you're first up with the safety performance targets.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about all of the targets all together. And let me go ahead and share my screen. So I know that this is always a little bit of a confusing process to go through. So hopefully we can find a little bit more background context for you today. So the reason we talk about performance targets is basically because when the new Infrastructure Act was passed, going back to 2012, the Moving Ahead for Progress, it really established this need to look at system measurement and be strategic about how investments were occurring into maintaining the infrastructure both at the national level, and then that trickled down to the state and the federal level. So what happened is that as part of that legislation, there were some national goals that were identified. And in order to support achieving those national goals, there was this practice that was established to develop national performance targets in several critical areas that would be established to help sort of frame how investments were being made into projects that would support the achievement of those national targets. So the national targets are focused on infrastructure conditions and things like what kind of condition bridges and pavement are in. They're focused on safety. They're focused on system reliability. So how, travel and freight reliability on the interstate system. And then there are also performance measures that are established for air quality. The air quality measures do not apply to our MPO area because we are not in a non-attainment area. Our air quality is too good. We don't have to report on the air quality, but we do need to set standards in all of these other areas. The way this works is that the targets are established by the U.S. Secretary of Transportation every 4 years for most of the targets, and then we also review the safety performance targets annually. So the targets are established nationally, and then the states establish performance targets that are intended to support the achievement of a national target. And then that trickles down to the MPO. So then the MPOs are required to set performance targets that also support the achievement of the state identified targets. So kind of a little flow chart so that we are making sure that the targets that are established nationally are being pursued by all of the different levels of transportation, planning, and project pursuits. Basically, by establishing targets, what we are doing is we are committing to pursue projects and objectives that support the achievement of those targets. The overall progress towards meeting performance targets are evaluated at the state level, not at the MPO level. And we have the option as the local MPO to either adopt the state targets or set our own targets. The Charlottesville-Albemarle MPO has historically adopted the state targets, which makes sense because so much of the state infrastructure is maintained by the state of Virginia. And then the policies and the processes that are used to identify projects are all heavily influenced by the state thresholds and the state policies as well. So typically we are pursuing projects based on how the state is prioritizing projects. And so that's why we have historically adopted the state targets. So just to go through a couple of the specific targets, I think the one that probably makes the most sense if you wanted to deviate from adopting the state targets are the safety targets, just because the data is showing that the Charlottesville-Albemarle MPO area maybe is showing a slightly different trend in some areas on the state, but again, we are not significantly doing anything different beyond using the state established processes for evaluating projects at this time. So there's an argument that can be made either way. We need to set targets, safety targets regarding the number of fatalities and the fatality rate, the number of serious injuries and the serious injury rate, and then the number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. So this chart up here basically shows what the state adopted targets are, what the trends are that are being shown in the Charlottesville area, and then what the actual targets would be if we adopt one set or the other. So you can see that for the change in fatalities, if we use the statewide target, this is actually showing an increase overall in the number of fatalities. What happens is that the performance targets themselves at the state level have to be established using data and performance measures. And so what they're showing is that the data based on their projections is actually showing that there's going to be an increase in the number of fatalities. So the performance target is actually trying to minimize how much those fatalities increase over the target year period. That said, when this discussion was held with the CTB a few months ago, the Commonwealth Transportation Board a couple months ago, they established both the performance-based targets and then they also established aspirational targets and instructed the VDOT staff basically to consider ways that they could work towards achieving these more aspirational targets. Regardless of the targets that are set related to fatalities or serious injuries, projects that improve the safety are high priorities for our region, and it will significantly impact whether or not we pursue safety projects. Those tend to be the projects that are prioritized for all of the localities. So if we adopt the targets that the statewide targets for the safety performance, we would be adopting the targets that are shown in this last column in the red. So it does have a little bit of a difference compared to if we adopt the targets that are based on what our local trends are showing. Any questions about the safety targets before we? Okay. Yeah.
So we'll use why we wouldn't aim for the aspirational targets, but would that change how we are selecting projects? Okay.
Functionally, it wouldn't. I think at this point, I would say that we are pursuing, as I think I shared with you all, we are pursuing the Safe Streets for All grant, which would help us identify more regionally specific goals for the performance measure. So it seems like if we wanted to say that we want to adopt a comprehensive set of strategies beyond what the state is doing, that would be the opportunity where we could really critically think through what those targets are and what it is that we're doing to support those beyond just, project selection or funding application.
Okay. Yeah, it's just saying our target is going to be 13. That's just kind of a weird thing to feel like we should.
Yeah. We should be aiming for zero, right? Like that's where zero philosophy.
Yes.
Yeah, it is interesting though that based on using the existing performance projections, there for that specific one, there really isn't a difference between the state and the local performance. Any other questions? This is always the one that feels really uncomfortable to establish. Okay. So the next one is really measuring the infrastructure condition and system performance target. So this is looking at what are the state of the maintenance of roads and bridges, and then also combine those with overall system reliability and performance. So for any of the performance measures that are talking about good condition, the goal is to be above whatever that performance target is. So you can see that for the Charlottesville, Albemarle, MPO area, just looking at the percent of bridges that are in good condition, the actual percentage we're showing is 10.8, whereas the 4-year target adopted by the state is 25.1. So this is the place where our region is a little bit below the state target. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but keep in mind that this is just looking at bridges that are in the national highway system, not necessarily all bridges in our area. So it could be that there are only a few, and if there's one or two that that are in poor condition, that could disproportionately impact what that performance measure looks like or what that actual performance is. So any of the ones that are in good condition, our goal is to be above that performance target, and then any of the ones that are in poor condition, our goal is to be below that target. So you can see that we don't want any more than 7.8% of our bridges to be in poor condition, and we are at 3.6 right now, so we're doing well in that category. Again, this makes a lot of sense to adopt from the state, to adopt the statewide targets for this, because the state is basically prioritizing the maintenance of the bridges and the pavement already. So it makes sense for our region to adopt the state targets here. And then for the reliability factors here at the bottom, these final three, you can see that the Charlottesville Albemarle area is performing very well above the state targets in all of those areas. So again, this is an area where it would make sense for us to adopt the state targets, because we are not seeing significant deficiencies that would make this a higher priority for our region compared to the statewide system. Any questions about these?
So for bridges, aren't we under the state or the actual target if we're twice as many or?
Yes. Well, the state target is 25.1 to be in good condition. And we have 10.8% that are in good condition. So we have less in good condition than the state target for our region. Yeah, correct. But for the poor condition, we want no more than 7.8. So we don't want to be above for the poor condition.
Isn't 7.8 the actual 3.6 target?
Oh, yes, you're right. I'm sorry. I think you're right.
No problem.
I'm glad I have other math people in the next week. Yeah. So again, this is an area where we can be aspirational and also something to think about.
Question, what's in between good and poor?
Can you answer that, Michael? Or Chuck?
They're fine.
I didn't hear the question.
The difference between good and poor for bridge condition.
They're rated on several criteria, superstructure, substructure, surface conditions of the deck. And if you're below in any one of those, it's rated as fair. And then if it's below like 5, I think it's rated poor. So it's just a matter of the rating system you use and what when they evaluate it, what it rates as on a scale of 1 to 10. The data is posted for each structure on the website, so you can actually go in and look at the data for each individual bridge in the district.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, there's a little time in the middle where,
It's fair.
Yeah. Those are ones that we just don't want to get. All right, any other questions on these? And then the last one is the transit asset management targets, and honestly, Juwan or Lynn, feel free to, or Zadie, feel free to jump in if you want to add anything to this. But basically for the transit asset management, these are established in conjunction with the transit agencies, just as a standard to make sure that their fleet and equipment and facilities are all in good condition. So for the smaller transit agencies, which are most of the transit agencies that operate in the state, including the John and Cat, the Department of Rail and Public Transportation sponsors what they call a Tier 2 asset management plan that establishes statewide performance measures for these agencies. So basically, these goals that are set for all of the smaller transit agencies throughout the state by DRPT. And the Charlottesville Albemarle MPO, as well as the other MPOs, have the opportunity to adopt those and say that, our performance goals are going to support the larger statewide goals for all transit operators throughout the state. Do you want to add anything, Glenn, or Zadie, or Javon?
I have a question about it being called aid-based. All right, then, they're the asset management is mostly based on how long you think the useful that asset would be. So if you're turning over the fleet of 12 years, down to what percentage of your fleet is over that? What about mileage? So where it depends on the asset condition for the vehicles. Usually based. And for equipment. As mentioned, we got a whole slew of buses that meet the age requirement, but not the mileage requirement. So it just seems a little.
And but do you want to clarify the age and the mileage requirements? Those are considered as two separate measures, correct?
Mileage is not considered at all when it comes to TAM planning. It is just the age of the asset.
Thank you.
And it is considered like the maximum age of an asset in terms of its expected lifespan. We use another scale that is useful life versus the useful life benchmark. Useful life is at the point at which an asset is eligible to receive federal funding for replacement. So generally in the Commonwealth, we see most of our assets begin their kind of phase out when they reach their useful life, which is generally about half the useful life benchmark. We do expect that over the short term, the actual versus the target is going to drift up a little bit because there is this significant delay in getting vehicles just due to shortages and backlogs still in the manufacture of buses. But we do expect that to kind of start to come down once transit agencies take ownership of vehicles that have been ordered over the past 2 years.
Any other questions? No. Thank you, Ryan. All right. So as far as the adoption of the MPO's performance targets, we are asking you all to make a recommendation to the policy board, who will ultimately determine which targets are adopted. The staff recommendation is that you all recommend the adoption of the state established performance targets for safety, infrastructure, and system performance and transit asset management. But alternatively, you could also adopt the safety targets based on the local terms, which are shown on the slide in front of us. Any other questions?
The alternative safety performance targets are more stringent than the state ones.
Correct.
And so I feel like I have this conversation every year. What are the consequences of these targets? Does anything happen with that? If we make them, if we miss them?
Not at the MPO level. Basically, these are a guiding framework that we would use and we would say these are the targets we want to achieve in our area, and we will commit to the programming to support the achievement of those targets. Functionally, they probably won't make that much of a difference because in our area we already prioritize safety projects. And as you can see, we don't really have this reliability concerns, and the state already prioritizes the infrastructure maintenance types of things. So I don't know that functionally it would make a significant difference, but we are not necessarily going to be penalized if we don't meet the targets. The state is held accountable for meeting the state's targets though, and our locally adopted targets will also not influence what the state targets are.
And by us adopting perhaps more stringent safety targets, the state isn't going to come back and say, hey, you're kind of screwing up our numbers. Okay.
So discussion, what do you guys think? Is this the year we finally adopt better targets? Is less people to die on streets this year?
Just to be clear, that's our goal regardless.
So we'll need a motion to adopt.
To recommend.
Recommend.
Yeah.
I'll make the motion to recommend the adoption of the alternative safety performance targets.
All right, we have a motion, do a second.
Okay.
All right, a motion and a second. You want to call the roll?
Ben Chambers,
Yes.
Roy Stoltenberg,
Yes.
Jessica Hirsch Bauer, Louis Carazana, Albert, Albert, I'm sorry, Kevin.
That hasn't formally done.
Charles Proctor,
Yes,
Michael.
Michael would vote for me.
Christine Jacobs,
Yes.
Dave Lacy, Bill Palmer.
Yeah.
Juwan Lee,
Yes.
Wood Hudson,
Yeah,
Sarah Pennington.
Yes. And can I clarify that recommendation also include the adoption of the state targets and the other
Yes.
areas there?
So we don't need another motion on that, or?
If I phrased it, I don't know if anybody said that, that's not what they meant
State
to.
targets on other. Go there. Next up, locality.
Do I have to do the slides first, right? And then. Someday I'll get this. Yeah, it does. So the Federal Transit Administration Section 5310 program is authorized under the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act, which was passed in 2015. And the Section 5310 program supports transportation services for seniors and people with disabilities. It's a discretionary grant program. DRPT administers the program and is the designated recipient. And then they pass through the funds to entities within the region. So mobility management builds coordination among transportation providers and expands the availability of services for seniors and people with disabilities. It has three goals: to increase transportation, to improve access to transportation, and to build transportation services for seniors and people with disabilities. So they would want us to work with public transit first, and then if that's not meeting the needs, then work to increase transit in other ways. The Foothills Area Mobility System has a mobility management program, and the TJPDC is considering applying for a mobility management grant that would be similar to the Foothills Area Mobility Systems. It would be a one call center, one stop, one call center that would have a website and information on all of the transportation options available, transit and volunteer driving and other things as well. And it'd be a call center where people can call in or visit the website and they would be referred to a ride of an existing service already. We've been talking with John and Kat about it, and they are on board and think it's a good idea. And so we would, in the first year of the program, if we were awarded the grant, we would introduce the concept of mobility management, and we would start working with service providers. And marketing would be to serve human service providers who work with older adults and people with disabilities. We're not going to turn away anybody who calls and is an older person with disability, but the grant is focused on serving that population. So we'll start the call center website. We'll also have a data system that will gather data on needs. So we'll be calling people back and making sure that they were able to get to where they needed to go. And if they weren't, we'll track that in our data system as well. And we'll be building partnerships. So the first year budget is $100,000. That slide is old. With a 4% local match, and it would have a half-time manager for 12 months for the year and a full-time staff for 6 months. And then once the first year is up, we can continue to grow the program. We'll be able to have that data saying, you know, where the needs are, and then we can work with service providers on meeting those needs. So some of the things that we can do would be to support transit and adding new services. We could also do like a taxi or gas voucher program. We could help support a volunteer driver program. We could try to expand services to rural counties, help coordinate scheduling. That's something that unified, like having a unified transit interface is one of the goals of mobility management. Like a one call center is to be able to have people, you know, I want to ride the bus and they don't have to know if it's John or UTS or CAT. Eventually it'll just be like one system to the public, which will be easier to understand. We can also do travel training where somebody works with a person who has barriers to riding transit and develops a plan to help them learn how to ride transit and overcome those barriers. Travel trainers typically ride on the bus with the people, and then sometimes they'll follow behind as the person rides on their own until they're comfortable that the person's able to do it on their own. This will also, the mobility management program will also be working to create efficiency and collaboration among the service providers. And so we're applying for a grant. It's due at the end of the month, and we hope if we get it to start the program, we'll do program startup in July, and then in December, hopefully we'll have staff hired and we'll be able to start receiving calls and making referrals.
All right, any questions, discussion? Now, do we have a motion to recommend the draft letter of support or any modifications to it? You know, one very minor thing, in the lines, your director.
Oh, I'll fix that.
I wonder if the letter still says 150,000.
Oh, yeah, I'll fix that.
So the actual letter we're recommending is just the one from Commissioner Galloway, Supervisor Galloway to right?
What exactly is the halftime manager?
The halftime manager, 20 hours a week.
Right. Are you saying that's all we need?
That's all we're doing.
That's what we're starting. We want to make sure to start this small and build over time. This fund 53, no, 10, I know that was wrong. It's not huge, the amount in the state. And so I think if we put in a massive application, it's unlikely to be funded. We need to build our program and to show success over time. And then like a lot of those little squares that she put was like more to come. These are the things that we would eventually like to be doing, but we need to build it first.
And we're gonna be looking for alternative funding sources as well. to grow.
Yes, that's actually a question I had. Who decided on 2,000 or the other figure from the state? Was coming from locals or?
The required local match is a 4% local match, which we can cover with existing funding coming in from our local funds. We're not asking an additional match for that.
What, curiosity, what anything you have to give up that you're currently using that funds for to pay for this?
No, the way that the CJPDC receives local per capita funding, 75% of that funding per policy of the commission is required to be on regional projects. 25% is on local specific projects. So that regional, it depends on what we're working on. So in years past, we've spent a large amount of that building the regional housing partnership. We've spent a lot of that funding on building the broadband application. So really that's the pot of funds that we use for startup programs without having to go to our local governments and ask for specific funding for new programs.
So you feel like you already have capacity and you can use that one?
Yeah.
Great.
Yes, sir.
All right, we have a motion on to recommend the draft letter.
Yeah, I'll make the motion to recommend the draft letter as amended.
All right, motion for a second.
Second.
All right, we got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Any abstentions? Recommendation passes unanimously. Next up, our update on our long range transportation plan.
Flip through. All right, so just as a reminder, we have talked about this whole process that we're going through to get through our long range transportation plan. So, wait, Ryan, were you first on the agenda?
No.
About the demographic. And then Ryan can give some updates after me. Okay. So Ryan will tell you in a minute about the demographic and land use trends that he's been working on. And then we've got through the existing system operations will be evaluated largely as part of our analysis on identifying the need priorities. But we have also met with the modeling staff at VDOT to talk about any sorts of usages for the regional travel demand model for this project. We have reviewed the background plans, and that will continue as the project moves forward. And then we do have the draft goals and objectives that we already talked with you all about. So really what I'm going to spend the bulk of my time today talking about is the project prioritization process that we've been working through with OIB to talk about how we're going to evaluate what some of these goals and objectives are based on our system needs. So just to give you a little bit of a reminder, the framework for the development of the needs in the project prioritization process had a few guiding principles that we were using to establish the system. So it's based on using existing publicly accessible data or data that is specific to the MPO. So both Pat and John provided us with some system on-time performance data that we'll be pulling in to use to assess the transit performance and help us identify where there might be infrastructure needs related to improving transit operations areas. And then the other thing is that it's based on our existing staff and technical capacity. So we don't have to necessarily rely on things that we don't already have available to run this process. And it is very highly focused on developing a replicable process. So it's something that we can use and adapt in future years. The process is developed on our regionally established goals and objectives, so we were working through that kind of simultaneously as developing that project to at least get an idea of what the goal and objective categories would be. And then each of the thresholds that was developed for the evaluation of system and project priorities includes 2 different thresholds. So we have a policy decision we can make based on some different thresholds that are available for us to assess how we want to measure how important different considerations. So we've been having these discussions. I hope it's been iterative. I hope I've been informing you as we've gone so that your feedback is incorporated into the process. But just a couple of things that I'll emphasize as we go through it today is that we incorporated additional multimodal considerations into the project prioritization based on your input. We also tried to apply more of an equity lens approach to making sure that where it could be factored into each of the different evaluation criteria that there was an equity component. And then we also added environmental impact factors in determining the need priorities. And I'll talk through that in a minute. Just so you all have an idea of how this whole process is going to work, basically performance measures are established in each of the goal and objective categories. There will be a raw score that's calculated for performance measures. So that's based on what's actually measurable. How many crashes there are, what percent ranking something is, and a list of how important different things are. There's going to be a raw score. That's going to be standardized to a 7-point scale. So it'll work score 1 to 7, or I think even 0 to 7. And then that's going to give us an opportunity to combine the standardized scores into the final need category based on how much weight we want to give each of the factors. So our draft goals, these are the different categories that will be measured: safety, equity and accessibility, efficiency, economic development, land use, and environmental impacts. And then this is just an example of what that whole calculation process is going to look like. So there's going to be a need score that is evaluated based on that normalization between 0 to 7, as you can see in this column right here, in each of those categories. And then there's a weight assigned, and that's based on how much priority we're going to give to each of those different criteria. Multiply those together, and that's going to give you a weighted score. And then the project's priority is going to be based on the score. You won't see the environmental impacts on here, and that's because those are going to be an adjustment based on the final score that is applied at the end, and I can explain that in a minute. But any questions so far? All right. So I just want to highlight a few things that are a little bit different than what we had talked about previously. Just as we've gone through this process, we realized maybe some of the outcomes weren't really getting us where we wanted to go, and we're identifying the priorities that we knew needed to be captured. So the roadway safety is pretty much the same category. We're using the potential for safety improvement, intersections and segment rankings, weighted by the equivalent property damage only crash values. And then the thresholds are listed where we can choose which of those we want to include in the evaluation. For the pedestrian safety, the initial methodology that they had recommended was based on identifying crash clusters using some spatial systems like the kernel density evaluation. And they realized that this wasn't really capturing a lot of the corridors or the segments that had pedestrian safety needs. So the recommendation that was switched to using the corridors and segments that were identified as part of the pedestrian safety action plan. This is a plan that was developed by VDOT in 2018. There have been a couple of revisions. I think the most recent map, the version 3.0 map, incorporates 2020 data, but it identifies the top 1% of the corridors and the top 5% of the corridors. This both looks at areas where there are existing crash clusters, and it also looks at corridors using a predictive analysis of these are areas where there's a lot of potential for crashes based on different characteristics like speed limit, attraction of or destinations that might be attractive to pedestrians and things like that. So it doesn't just depend on crashes already occurring, but helps us determine where there are safety needs for crashes that could occur even if they haven't occurred yet. So that's an adjustment based on what was previously presented. Well, any questions on that? All right, for the equity and accessibility, I think we already talked about this in some detail, but we're really using job access as a proxy to how easy it is for people to access points of interest throughout the transportation system. Originally, we were kind of basing this on accessibility to activity centers, but after some back and forth, I think we decided to take out the use of the activity centers as sort of a standard as a gauge to use for access. So I'm going to read my notes here because this gets a little bit technical, but it uses spatial statistics to determine the job access for each census block where there's a population of people. So you're figuring out how many people are in a census block, how many jobs do they have access to, and where there's a deficiency, it's going to show up as a transportation system need. In order to help us determine where the transportation system has a deficiency that could be corrected or where there's an opportunity improvement, what we're doing is we're taking the existing condition of the system that we're measuring, so we can take bike access to jobs, for example. We want to say if we're measuring how many people have access to jobs by bike, we're going to compare, we want to compare how many people currently have access to jobs by bike versus how many people could have access to jobs by bike under an idealized scenario. So for the bike access to jobs, we're comparing the job accessibility at the existing level of travel stress to jobs that are accessible at the highest level of travel stress of level 4. That means that if all of the barriers to being able to access jobs by bike were removed. So if everybody could access jobs at that very highest level of travel stress, that's what the deficiency is, and that helps us determine where there's an opportunity, where system improvement can help increase job access. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So each one of those categories has a existing condition that's being compared to an ideal condition. For transit access, that splits the difference between how many people can access jobs by transit now versus how many people can access those same jobs by vehicle. The vehicle access is the ideal condition that transit access is being compared to. And for auto access, it's comparing the difference between current accessibility during peak hours to accessibility during non-peak hours. So there is a population component to this. And so for the general factors, we're applying this analysis to the general population. And then we're also going to do the same thing using the equity priority communities specifically related to transit access. And that's going to help us identify where there are specific accessibility needs that are disproportionately impacting those equity populations that we want to make sure that we are considering in our system evaluation. Any questions on this one? Okay.
How's that? Have we gotten to where we start seeing like station needs an example? I mean, it sounds good in theory. I wonder what it looks like.
Yeah.
How can they use qualitative data when you get qualitative about stuff?
Well, sure. Yeah, I don't have the model to run for you yet, but that's something that we should have in the next week or two to be able to start looking at it. And the other thing I just want to like reiterate that the quantitative analysis is just starting point to have the discussion. So we'll be sort of balancing that by also asking for input on more qualitative input as well.
Maybe we could ask a question. This is pure work with Timmy Warren, right? On this, do they have?
We're working with Renaissance and Michael Baker.
Do they have another example of another locality where they've done that? Where they've done this?
I don't know if they've done this specifically with other areas because some of this was very specific to us. So they've done other things like this. I can ask them, but we should also have our model pretty soon to be able to.
Yeah, so I was at meeting last week.
No worries.
Have you run into any issues with that in these areas? I know they've been used for other analysis before and sort of maybe a little bit too broad and not specific enough in the targeted areas.
Yeah, I think there is a challenge with the equity emphasis areas, but they are pretty it's included in the memo, who is included in that, and I think with the broader emphasis on environmental justice compared to just Title VI or ADA, I think it does pretty comprehensively covers the areas that we want to make sure we are. The challenge is that it's not going to pick out specific demographics. So if we wanted to know specifically who is, who are the populations that are negatively, that have a negative deficiency that we want to correct, we can't necessarily determine which type of population that is. Any other questions? I guess we could go back and look at this data ourselves. All right, mobility and system efficiency. Most of this is pretty standardized and not really different from what we presented before. The one thing that is different is that we added this bus transit on-time performance evaluation to it. So this, and there were a couple of different thresholds that we could use, and we'll work with the transit providers and the UL to figure out which makes sense. But again, this is really going to evaluate where there is an on-time performance deficiency in the system that is impacting transit. And this would help emphasize where there might be some sort of bottleneck or systemic issue where there's a need to improve the infrastructure. We can either use as the thresholds the system-wide weekly average on-time performance from the previous year. So basically, if the on-time performance is the same as the previous year, that wouldn't necessarily show up as a high need, whereas if the on-time performance is deteriorating between years, that would show up as there is a system need that needs to be corrected. Or the alternative threshold would be to use whatever target the transit agencies have adopted as their own. Any questions? And then the land use and economic development, this has largely been developed since we had previously discussed this. So what we had talked about with the consultant team was using the walk score and bike score from V-Trans in order to help us identify projects where there is a good opportunity for transit infrastructure or transportation infrastructure to make more meaningful connections within the development areas, in order to increase the walkability between where people are coming from and important community features that people want to access. So, so this is getting into the land use component right here. And then there's also an evaluation that will be applied to the disadvantaged populations. So the general methodology is that areas that have a higher walk score, or segments that have a higher walk score, but not a 100% walk score, will have a higher priority because there's a better opportunity to connect for those transportation features to provide a connection in an otherwise walkable area. So it's kind of the opposite of the access. In some ways, the access is showing where there's the greatest efficiency. And this is really showing where there's the greatest opportunity to create a more systemic connection among the different features that people would want to access. Any questions on this?
So to show the opportunity, the V-Trans walk score would have to be agnostic to the current conditions, right? It was just how close are you? Is that how the V-Trans score works?
It's a little bit of a black box. You want to jump in, Michael?
Yeah, well, I've only looked at it before and fully digested how it works. These are different parts of town that have low walkability scores. They could have better walkability scores if you simple linkages.
Yeah,
Maybe. So, yeah, I kind of question that myself, but. And I think it's walkability scores coming from walkability score, but I forget now who actually generates a walk score. But it's like it's a third party creating that. It's not necessarily not VDOT data. VDOT using walk.
using the block with that.
Yeah.
It does go to proximity in the network. So it would take over those things.
Network capability. So yeah, that's that whole thing.
Yeah,
It's
so
a critical link or big changes, right? Our neighborhood is currently cut off, you make one linkage and boom, wow, you can walk easily to the hospital or something like that.
Yeah. So. I guess then the question is like, is there a metric we could use to capture that, like, that idea of there could be a linkage, as there was for now, but if we had one simple linkage, that would be great. Which is, I think, what we're trying to get at with this metric, right?
We're trying to connect with this metric, that is part of it, is there's an opportunity to connect an otherwise well-connected area and to fill an existing network gap in an otherwise well-connected area, yes. And part of that depends on the thresholds that we use. So we can either say, I think the recommended threshold for either for box scores that were above, I don't remember if it's 100%, but 49, so 49 and above for any area that's saying, basically saying if you have the, I don't know, this isn't really what it says, but basically saying it's in the top half of what could be walkable in our area with some additional improvements. You know, we can use that as a threshold. The other threshold is that they recommended was any just using the overall walk score for all of the areas in the city of Charlottesville and the established growth areas in Albemarle County. So just focusing on those areas that have already been identified as wanting to increase their walk.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's sort of my concern with this whole presentation or this whole document, like. Every individual thing seems logical and reasonable, but like it all uses some underlying algorithm to generate some score that we then use that is kind of a black box, so we don't really know how they interact.
Right. So again, we are working within the framework of the project that we started with. This gives us a point to start having a conversation about what the system needs are, but we completely acknowledge that the conversation does not stop. This basically says, based on these needs, this is where we think are the areas that we need to look at. But let's talk about it and see if anything does or doesn't make sense and have a bigger conversation. So again, it's a starting point. It's not the end of the conversation. So I just really want to emphasize that this will be sort of ground truth and checked over by you all as well as other stakeholders.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess it's just when we have come along, spit something out, we can do spot checks.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And if not, like, where do we get these funky results from?
And
Okay.
the other aspect is systematic, you know, I mean, I didn't create meaningful corridors, like allow people to go longer distances across a relatively small, you know, area. We're 6 by 8 miles north, south, and west. How do you get from one side to the other? You know, how do you get? That's why you pitch out the activity centers, which is something I kind of like keep coming back to. It's like 5 or 6 different major areas of our community where people probably want to get to. They want to get to downtown, they get to downtown, they want to get to hydraulic and 29. And that's where the density is, or potential density is, that's where a lot of services are. So I mean, I don't want to like take you off from where you're headed, but it's just like you first to come back to hopefully all the data actually fits together something that is meaningful and it's not just collecting data. Sometimes you can collect data and you get results from it, and then you end up with something that's not really very transformative because the patchwork of projects is not really working towards a larger goal. And our goals are relatively broad too, so then, you know, it's kind of like how things fit into that. But, you know, I'm sure Renaissance probably has done this before and will deliver a good product.
And I think the alternative is not using that, right? And I think we have to have a balance of both. So this is the data side. It's then using what you guys are both talking about, like when it spits something out, is that logical to what we've all seen as the needs being on the ground? That conversation has also.
Yeah, the other thing that I mentioned just related to what Michael was saying is what is also challenging about this is we're trying to figure out how do you prioritize things that are kind of at fundamental opposite ends of the spectrum. So Michael, what you're talking about gets a little bit more towards like the accessibility measures. Where are there overall accessibility barriers to how people are able to access jobs generally versus how do we create these sort of walkable communities where people can get places without having to rely on vehicles. Those are both really important priorities. We need to consider a multitude of ways that people can access both of those, and they both support identified goals for our region. And we need to just try to find a balance of how you prioritize between some of those things that maybe might have conflicting recommendations associated with them. Any other comments on this one? Okay. All right, so as I mentioned about the, when we talked about the whole matrix, we added in some environment and resiliency calculations or evaluations to the overall priority process. These are basically going to be adjustments that occur to the final score. So you'll get your cumulative score from all the other factors, and then there will be an adjustment to the combined means based on some of these identified resiliency means. So the ones that are suggested were 5% adjustment for segments that are exposed to historical flooding. I don't actually think there were a lot that were identified in V-Trans, but that could be something that we see an increase in over time that gives us an opportunity to evaluate and prioritize those. And then we also added an equity component to this so that there's an additional weight that is given for projects or for needs that are identified in economically distressed communities. Any questions on? No. Okay. So the last step of this is really figuring out how to so this is going to help us identify where the system needs are. That helps us determine which kinds of projects we want to be looking at when we develop our constraints list. So we'll go through the needs, we'll look at the projects that have been identified through other planning processes or that are relatively straightforward, where there's a very direct project that can be applied. And we'll start seeing where there's a match between identified projects and the system needs that are determined. And then we'll start actually prioritizing the projects. And so to develop the project score, this is going to follow a little bit more some of those evaluation processes that are already in place, like Smart Scale. And I'll be honest right now that I don't have that menu with the full details of how this is going to be evaluated available, but I can certainly get back to you if you all have any questions. So we're basically going to use the potential for a project to reduce crash frequency based on crash modification factors that have already been developed. So this is a list of potential things you can do, infrastructure improvements you can do to reduce crashes. And there's a crash modification factor that is associated with all of those. And so we can pull that in and then convert the crash frequency reduction by the vehicle mileage to get the reduction, the potential reduction in crash rate for the projects. The accessibility is going to be largely based on the potential for the project to increase accessibility by the different modes, and then both doing that for the general population as well as for disadvantaged population. And then what the consultants have proposed is that there are bonuses points that are given to projects that provide multimodal elements in their project. So they suggested a 2-point addition for bicycle, pedestrian, bus, and travel demand management projects and things like bus.
Is that 2 points for each of those 4 categories? Is that what it is?
I believe so. And this is based on some other, these are based on similar processes that are used in other projects. But yes, I believe it is for each one.
So somebody can walk away with 8 points, or one of the projects get 8 additional points.
Potentially, I think, yeah. If it has all of it. I'm sure these path, I don't know if you get 2 points. Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah, I can clarify that. The mobility and system efficiency, that's really based on the average daily travel around the project limits and where the project limit buffer is determined by functional class. So it's really measuring the potential impact to improve the system efficiency based on the average annual daily trips and the functional classification, which indicates what the expected use of that road is, and then also incorporating the on-time performance expected improvements. And then the land use and economic development, this is where we would rely on the travel demand model to really measure where the job growth is based on the analysis zones that are established. So we are really going to be measuring how many additional jobs will be able to be accessed within those analysis zones. And they are using the activity centers for this right here. And I can have a conversation with them about whether or not we want to do that. And then also using the walk score and bike score. Again, this isn't, I don't have as much information, and I wish I did have this information a little bit more prepared for you, but, the details are very limited, and I'll have to have some conversations with them about exactly how it will be, calculated. But any questions or feedback?
So, at what point do we make the decisions about like, which cutoff to use or all those, decision points?
Yeah, so I think we have a lot of flexibility on doing that, but we definitely, because the next phase of this, so we're working to basically review our goals and objectives with different stakeholder groups. And then we'll get those vetted, and then we'll go to the public and start asking for public feedback to determine how much weight to give any of those. In conjunction with that, we can also start talking about the thresholds that we're going to use, because we really need to establish thresholds before we start prioritizing needs.
Yeah, so I mean, for some of them, like, I have opinions based on like, just reading it, right, like. Growth area versus places with high loss or high population, like there's places not in the growth area, like Barracks West, have a lot of people, pretty dense. Not in the growth area for arcane reasons from the 70s. Others I like 1.5 versus 1.3, like don't really see any intuitive like guess of which one is better. I think it would be helpful to see like not just to see like the maps that some one big like spits out, right? That's like then say, what if we take this other threshold, holding everything else constant, and then see how that changes the map, and then be able to compare those to get a sense of like what it really means to use that threshold.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think that would be really helpful to see this all together. I think the one caveat that I have is that I also think that is also I mean, how do I say that? I think that is that we're influenced to use the threshold based on what our preferred outcomes are versus vice versa. I think that's the only other thing that we have to consider.
Yeah.
But I will let you all and the policy board guide how you would look to go through navigating.
I guess to kind of put thresholds and use more of like a decay function, right? Which it seemed like we did in some places, but not others.
They use the decay function and the job accessibility, so jobs that are closer to you are worth more than jobs that take longer to get to by any of the minutes. So it's used in that one. I don't know if it's used in any of the other factors.
Yeah, now I know how easy it would be to incorporate that in like a law score where you just have sort of a continuous scale of how much it's weighted, but I don't know. So we're a ways out from it. Okay. I did have one kind of working question on the like crash adjustment numbers or not. That's not really about this much the underlying thing. It's like 2.2 million as the equivalent property damage for a fatality, which is like way under like, the federal Department of Transportation's value of statistical life, which is like 13 million and change, right? Any idea why that is?
Chuck, I don't know if you know the answer to that. I will say that these are the EPD, the equivalent property damage only that is used in smart scale. So this does align kind of if we wanted to get an idea of how projects support the smart scale. There's a little bit of an alignment. We are able to adjust those. So if we decide we want to use a different value for those.
Here's mostly.
Yeah.
CPD.
I'm really not asking for any sort of action right now, but again, if you have any other additional comments that, as we wrap this up, if you want to, have any other input you want to be considered, happy to take that back.
I guess going on what I said about potentially 8 bonus points from those circle and those all the bonus stuff. Isn't the base amount of points set? So you're potentially talking more bonus points than base point maximum. After your meeting, if I look at age.
This is for the I need to ask them because I think this is added to the raw score. I'll follow up with them and see if that's 2 points if you have any of those or 2 points each. For clarification.
But added to the raw score of 100.
Well, because prioritization project scoring is in. The 7 is the maximum.
I think standardized to the 7 point. Again, I don't have like a number that like lists out this methodology explicitly, so I can follow up on it. Yes.
Other discussion questions? Early confused?
Thank you all for sticking through all of that very technical information.
Thanks, Andy.
Yeah.
Next up, we have the ACF 5-year.
Yes, so back this summer, fall, I had a chance to look at the ACS 5-year data for 2021. I say that because I think that was like the most major milestone for data release. Since fall, I believe some of the numbers have changed. You've noticed on in your attachment that there are some pages where I've noted fall 2022, what that data. But I went back and looked at the 2045 long range plan to develop the demographic section for the 2050 update. Obviously, it was really quickly. The total population for Albemarle and Charlottesville is about 158,000. Most dominant racial group, white alone, second Black or African American, and then I believe it's Asian and Hispanic are relatively close. The last column there, the right.
Hey Ryan,
Yes.
can you clarify, this is for not just the MPO boundary, but all of Albemarle, correct?
Yes, Danny, good point. As you will see in a subsequent map, the MPO boundary actually bisects tracks. So what I ended up doing was, where possible, probably in the future, I'll see if I can actually figure out some of those tracks where it's we're gonna actually count the whole track. Demographics, vehicle, this was in the vehicles available, this was in the 2045 LRTP. I probably have that in 2050. Poverty rate by education, household income. Educational attainment, this was also characteristics. Industry. Travel time to work. Both graph means of transportation to work from one now. Here they feel value in feet. The lighter the shade, the lower the percentage, the darker the shade, greater the percentage. Carpool, bus, bicycle, walk, work from home. I'm sure that's probably a lot different now than back. Means to work by age. Speak over English. This chart was the same as language characteristics, English proficiency, jurisdiction, language over the home. disability characteristics by race. That, again, low. Low number. White. Median income. Which was the less. Shows the less than 40,000 a year. Households greater than 150,000. Ratio of 150,000 to less than 50,000. Overall, the average population in the census tract is around 3,800. Standard deviation of about 1,400. So there's a wide range in terms of the population in the census tract. Some information I did see block groups, but there wasn't much information in the block group geographies. There's a little bit in this chart. That's median age, population 65 years and older, population 29 years and younger. Ratio of 65 and older to age 129. Ratio of female to male. Again, population. Percent white alone, or if you think backward, it should also be minority. With the legend order. This is percent white alone per minority. So this is basically the percent of the white population in the census tract versus the percent minority. And then I'm broken down by these races. There's Black, African American, Black minority, Asian minority, Hispanic minority. That's it. I think that I will go and try to update some of those data sets that I've get back on all of the machines. There may be some other ATS data that I'm going to include. Final product. I will update these maps to include the actual percentages. For the most part, I look at this map and not probably get the solution with the numerical values. So that will include in the final product. Any questions?
So Brian, as you're doing this analysis, what kind of interesting trends did you find?
That it looked a lot like 2045. There wasn't much variation. I think one surprising thing that I saw, I think it's kind of moved to Charlottesville. We're seeing the area now in 2022, 2023. Demographically, I think African Americans, they were the only group to decline population, I think, in the city. I think that was probably not expecting any decline demographic. But, I was also surprised by the needs to try to build
And you said you'll include numbers for some of these slides, you know, like the.
Yes, well, I think, Danny and I, we've been talking, just last week, and, yeah, I think that, having, these numbers. These maps.
Can you explain, populations as a strategy? The numbers is 800 showing in 5% population and different zone probably county or West County low.
Okay, was that out there?
How are they? I'm sure the population, the showing in the base of the city itself. Or they get certain organizations and what their record is here. We're just gonna show.
Yeah, so basically out there, but this is basically, this is just the population of the census tract. So basically,
So it's not showing density.
yeah, so basically here, you've got the little population here as compared to here.
Okay.
This is less than population than this. This is less population than that.
Okay.
And I'll try to clear that up. The, final section of the.
And it's the same with the ratio of female and male, it's pregnancy or so for, yeah, because it's more females in the south, or from the county, certainly can't pop, I guess.
Yeah, so basically out there, again, this is by census tract and not, although that is a. But yeah, so basically this is the tract, there is a higher number of emails and males and so. That census tract.
Okay.
Do you know what the total range is, Ryan, between the, between what they're like 60 to 40 or something?
Yeah, yeah, Sandy, I mean, we're really talking about very small. Differences in the shades.
Curiosity, there's a big bike to work on the upper left corner of Ormond County. Do you know why?
Which one?
For bike to work.
Bike to work.
That sense of track that's in northwest of Albemarle County shows up. Really, page 14.
Where's the back to work for
Page 13, yeah. Yeah.
All those people treating the park.
Yeah, you know, that's, I'm glad you pointed that out, Juwan. I was kind of curious about.
So. And one on the, especially on the tables, what would be helpful maybe is like to note, like the margin of error and particularly with when the margin of error are really high compared to the data point. Like it doesn't show up so much on the county-wide stuff, but, I know there's like one local news organization writing articles about like their neighborhoods basically running not group, and like making these kind of broad claims, but the margin of error, if you look at the table, it's like larger than the actual data point you're looking at.
Right.
So when they said the data point went up like 30%, like that's like well within the margin of error.
Right.
Under 10%.
Yeah, you know, Roy, I thought about that as I was going through this and comparing it together. You start putting in another column, maybe it's really.
Yeah, I think that's not needed. We can something more like ask the risk when it's like unreliable, maybe, you could like make some threshold, like the margin of error, like 40% of the data point value or something, I don't know.
Yeah, that's. I'll see what I can do then. To read agenda item 6.
All right, thanks, Ryan. Round table updates, usually we're in order now. All right, just start with ride share. Just is everyone around the room, so like someone volunteers to speak first.
This will be a really quick update. DRPT grants are due February 1st, so that is the current rideshare activities. We will not only be applying for our regularly scheduled operating grant that we do every year, but DRPT has tasked all of the CAPS, which is the Commuter Assistance Programs, that's our official title now, with doing a strategic plan similar to the transit agencies. So we will be applying for a technical assistance grant to be undertaking that particular requirement in the strategic plan, which I think is really exciting given the timeline of everything with, you know, hybrid and remote work really taking a large presence during the pandemic and seeing how that's now working into the fabric of most employees. And the addition of the Afton Express, I think is a really good time to be looking at what different things we could be doing now that there are a lot of different other opportunities. So those two are the big things. Speaking of Afton Express, they are in, well, I guess maybe today is the last day for a public comment period on some route changes and schedule changes that they will be implementing, hopefully starting in February. They are adding routes, so it's good changes. But if anyone would like to take a peek at that, there is some information listed from either the TJPDC or the Rideshare Facebook with a link to where you can send those comments and looking at that. The schedule is mostly there to accommodate the health service workers. So those who are working extended shifts late into the evening.
Have you guys gotten a lot of comments on that?
So that is a project through CSPDC, so they have received the comments, but to my knowledge, when we met last Monday, they had not received too much feedback, just a couple of people here or there that wanted to see slightly different tweets.
Good.
I will be happy to report what that final information and final schedule looks like the next time that we meet.
Sounds good. Thanks. Next up, we have the MPO.
Yeah, a couple of exciting things that are happening. First of all, as I referenced earlier, we are scheduling the stakeholder discussion groups for the long-range transportation plan to provide feedback on the draft goals and objectives for February. So we have the business stakeholders scheduled, and I think I'll be able to schedule the community partner organizations and the safety professionals later this week. So that's exciting. As we mentioned earlier, smart scale projects are the recommended funding scenarios for smart scale projects are occurring a little bit later on the CPB agenda today. I just pulled up the live stream. Looks like they're going through transportation revenue updates now, and I haven't got the smart scale announcement. So after this meeting, you can all rush down and bring your computer time and catch the results. And then the last thing that I want to mention is pending unexpected news from that announcement. With a $42 million price tag, we are making the educated assumption that the Ravenna River Bicycle Pedestrian Bridge is not going to be funded this round. So we are working with VDOT to develop a raise grant application to fund the PE, the preliminary engineering phase of the work, in order to identify what some of the actual risks are, in order to hopefully, one, go ahead and find another funding source to do that first project phase, and then second, to reduce those contingencies to a point where the project could potentially be a little bit more competitive for funding through smart scale or another funding source. So we will be asking the policy board for a resolution of support at their meeting. And this all kind of is coming together very quickly, so I did not have time to put anything in your packet, but the application deadline is for the week.
So does that, are we missing out on anything that we could be applying for instead by doing that?
By applying for the race grant application? I don't know that there's anything that we had in our pipeline that we were ready to move forward at this point. That this seems like a project where there's been a lot of work, a lot of momentum, and you know, the returns to benefit. But we could potentially, each region can apply for multiple projects. Did you have something in mind?
Well, the Union Station, they really lost out on the race grant before. Actually, I kind of take that back. Preliminary study was all about the existing zoning, which really right now. So we'll do that. Well, so then the other question we ask is like, would this, if we get the grant, would that be looking at potentially like other alignments that would save money, or would we like doubling down on this alignment via policy board last year?
That's really a question for the policy board. So they will basically let us know what they would like to include as part of that grant application. I think the unofficial feedback that I've heard sort of, feeling out what direction they would like it to go. I think there's pretty strong feelings that they have done due process and getting to the point where we are right now, but they can give me direction in the meeting next week.
Yeah, well, very well, the alignment that was quite expensive, so. All right, well, this policy's gonna do what they're gonna do. Thanks. All right, Charlottesville.
Yeah, I'll take that. So my first update is sort of a little bit of inside baseball. Last month, we kicked off what we're calling a transportation working group within the city. It's going to be a regular and ongoing meeting and coordination between folks across city departments, public works, public service, neighborhood development, to make sure that we're all on the same page with what transportation projects are currently going on, what's upcoming, what are our priorities in the future, what data needs to be had, sort of making sure we're all on the same page. I'm really excited to get that started. It's not really something we've been doing in the city for recent years. It sort of replaces something we were doing earlier that was more focused around construction projects. Some of the transportation people get a little bored with that meeting because, sometimes it wasn't transportation focused. So this puts them in a meeting that should be interesting to them throughout the entire day. Part of that is going to be, making sure that we're staying on top of what projects that we have coming up. So we're building out sort of a spreadsheet that sort of tracks all of those things. Hopefully we are looking to make that portion of the spreadsheet public facing, so the public also knows what we're up to. Part of that working group will also be a new position, actually an old position, but it's a current position posted for the bike ped coordinator. So if you have anybody in mind who might be able to help me out with bike ped needs in the city, that position's up there. That person will also be not just bikes, pedestrians, but also scooters. We just recently extended the permit to Beta for the scooters so that we can address some of the issues, and we're hoping to get a bike ped coordinator position or someone hired into that position to help us work with Beta to figure out what those updated permit regulations might look like, so that we saw some Bea's issues and saw some city of Charlottesville's issues as well. Aside from things that are directly within my purview, among the STIPs and the Jones update, CAT will be releasing this week a RFP for their transit strategic plan. We have to have that due to DRPT by the end of the year, so that we can continue to get state and federal funding. It's going to be a kind of tight timeline. Usually these transit strategic plans take about a year. We're putting out the RFP this week, so that means we'll probably have somebody under contract in a month, and that means we have 10 months to do what we would have to do in a year. So that's going to be a very tight turnaround. We are planning to do some of the planning based on the previous system optimization plan and the regional transportation study. So some of that would be folded in, especially the data and stuff that we'll need.
Is that different from a transit development plan, or is it just?
So for certain agencies, of certain size, instead of doing a transit development plan, DRPT has created a different requirement for a transit strategic plan. Very similar document, but more geared towards what are you guys trying to actually accomplish, and not just an exercise of what money do you need to carry out your current system or to tweak your current system. So it's a more in-depth dive that a TDC usually does, and it's geared towards, I think it's like 16 agencies in the state of a certain size, so, and CAD and gone back to that goal. We're seeing some of that next year. And then the last update I had, also a CAD one, we are in the midst of doing a study for what fuel CAD is going to be using going forward. We are still in the process of determining what fuel type will be. There should be some meetings coming up. If some of you may be invited to discuss what the findings of our consultant have been so far. And then once we get past that and have decided what fuel type will be, our consultant will be moving on to more of a space planning effort for the CAP facility to figure out, you know, if we're going electric, where we need to put the plugs, where we need to put additional space in our maintenance bays. So, we've got a few things in the fire for that.
So, and what, the consultant has found?
I mean, they've been looking at multiple fuel types. They've been looking at battery electric buses, CNG, hydrogen, maybe. And I don't think they've come down with this is what you guys should be doing. Some of that is going, most of that is going to be determined sort of by internal policy. So we'll have the data and look at it and see what the right thing is going forward. But I think the people who are deciding what the right thing going forward is going to be probably 2 months out, 3 months out.
Yeah, I mean, there's infrastructure issues as well, you know, we can't pick one and go with it without building the right infrastructure. And so the information we provided, the decision will be made by the decision. So we'll see. Then you've got to mention microtransit.
Yes.
I'm in there, yeah. But yeah, we're ready to lock that. We're you know, put that out there to see who, what kind of system we want their party to or hybrid. And that will determine what kind of resources we need as far as policy. And then the software.
And an update on this if we have more work to do.
And I do have one question for you. I mentioned the VDOT quarterly report, that there's this project, pedestrian improvement at Ridge and Cherry, not yet funded, that I heard of that before. I don't know, but isn't that considered the Parkdale area?
I think that's a separate project. They're both local administrative projects to do that, but I think one of them is HSIP and one in the Smart Scale, like the history is the Smart Scale.
What page you looking
I
at?
mean, that is, that's like 26 of that document. Well, hold back it, or it's,
I could go back and look at it. We have a spreadsheet of the administrative projects, and I think that meant one where they were looking to shift funds from a different project into that one.
Gotcha.
And needed approval from the to make that shift of funding, but
yeah,
I'm not sure
actually, that's
that's-
listed separately.
Yeah.
And it does say, yes, HSIP, but, confused because it seems to be the same intersection.
yeah, one is the intersection, you know.
Yeah, it was much smaller, like talking about some crosswalks that funded a few years before the Smart Scale project.
Gotcha.
So it's like, there were like several projects in that one stretch, there were 2 Smart Scale ones, there was one HSIP, I think we actually were doing away with, replaced by a Smart Scale one, and then there's one actually in Ridge and Cherry, that is still an HSIP project for some crosswalk improvements. Again, they all
Okay.
came in at different times.
Yeah, I thought it was Bridge and Bridge and Monticello that was mixed because we overlapped, and then there's like one is the intersection. That's part, the one that's named Fishery Southwest Corridor is the Bridge Cherry Elliott intersection, I think.
I thought it was actually south of that intersection, this is what was being addressed with the district, but I can look into it and check it. All right, so engineer and see. Or you can sort it out, but it's going on.
Sounds good. I'll do some more research on that too before I touch base with it some more. It's great.
Meeting next week, Monday, as part of the MPO's community advisory committee, we're going to be talking about a pre-bridge lane project. So we've been investigating whether or not we could turn this short roadway that extends from Garden Top Park down to 250 in Kansas. We could turn that into either a one-way roadway or close it to vehicles and promenade sports. So we're going to be bringing those 2 options to the public on Monday night, and go from there. We'll leave that to the board in March. And then I'm going to hand it off to others.
Yeah, we have a secondary third plan update. We're going to go to the board in March to get their recommendations that have been made for a public hearing. And then we have the, priorities we're also working on, we're moving forward and paying for that, those right now. We're working on the maps. Doing some direction. It's good to compare what you have and see what I have. You do that or ask. See that, what are the
Ida,
Sure. We're kicking off a project selection process or finding. We have a series of meetings next week. One will be in each residency, the Charlotte residents will be next Wednesday. And a lot of people have invites. In last week, the basic purpose behind this is, if you think about it more broadly, you know, we're talking about capital improvement project, there are probably four major steps. The first one is planning, where the ideas to come out of the ether or come from an elected official or identified safety needs, what have you. And that's at the beginning of the process. You know, at the end of the process, you have to maintain it. We've had projects selected in the past where the maintenance of things have been completely fully considered, maybe a bridge and streetscape improvements. The third step is what we're all familiar with, the engineering and the construction. And we're trying to really emphasize the second step, which is project selection. The past around smart scale, our location design development department has taken on some drafting what the concept plans are going to be and developing the actual budget estimates to go into the application of the smart scale route. We're trying to extend that. We did that a little bit with the previous round of revenue sharing and cap, but it came along somewhat late in the process. And this round of revenue sharing and cap, they'll be doing that same service of offering. It's not a mandatory service, but it's a service we provide in all the localities where we'll help develop the concept plan and help create the budget estimate, which regardless of whether it's done by the locality or by VDOT district development design manager, Mike Jacobs has to sign off on the estimates for any application that's going in. It has to be in a format that will be acceptable to the people who review the application. So that estimate is very important. It's in the right format. But the process we're really trying to introduce here is going a little bit before those concept plans and those estimates created, and that's making sure that the localities can sort of craft what that idea is they want for VDOT to, you know, do that preliminary engineering, do that estimation for the application. And it's really it has sort of longer range and near-term components. Obviously, revenue sharing and cap will come on the odd years of cycle. We're getting ready to enter into one. So we find ourselves sort of needing to create a sort of sketch plan of localities and a really good project narrative that explains what that project is now. But what we'd like to try and do is get, even before that happens, sort of have a stable project, if you will. What are the projects each locality wants to do in the next 3 to 5 years? You'll have documents, planning documents, one of that first step of planning. You have hundreds of documents, hundreds of projects that you might want to do. And we're trying to get the localities to prioritize what their projects are. Now, Eric's talking about rural efforts, it's cool, talking about that too. Which is good because it's like, can we get like the top 25 or 30 projects you really are thinking about doing in the next 3 to 5 years? Can we get that on our radar screen too? And from that, we'll pick projects as we go into that even odd year cycle of revenue sharing, as far as getting on the other side. So that we pick projects out of that stable, we start to define exactly, what is the concept you're trying to do? We put it in context, the project itself. What are you trying to do? What's the land use either side of the sidewalk project, road improvement project? What's happening beyond the limits of the project? If it's a bike trail, what are the next phases of this thing? How does it sort of fit into that larger context? And what that hopefully will do with a good concept plan and good project description, scope, narrative, it will allow both VDOT, and they're reviewing the applications and what they're actually, what our location design department is trying to craft that plan. What is that context supposed to be? What are the objectives that are supposed to be? And I think it's in some respects a chance for localities to impress upon some VDOT road engineers some of the things that may not always they're looking at from their standards, which are typical, width and slope and type of stuff like that. It may be a little bit more land use and some of the aesthetic treatments that localities might want. But it also is really helpful localities understand sometimes when they are crafting a plan, some of the limitations that may be imposed on by VDOT's standards. We've seen a couple of projects this last round where I think of Avon Street, at the city county line, where there was a concept of using that bridge, the bike trail to go across the bridge, and that pretty quickly got ruled out at the beginning of that process. And process of creating that concept plan and application is pretty compressed in a 3-month process. And trying to think before we get into that process, what are some of the trade-offs that we might be having to assess and sort of helping bridge that planner engineering divide where the planners can sort of understand some of the limitations they may face in the engineering realm. And again, I'm trying to help the engineers understand some of the goals planners may have too. This is a new process. Well, like I said, we'll have to sort of work in it. I think we're going to learn more from this round that we will be applying towards the smart scale round, subsequent thing. And then maybe in a couple of years from now, we will have stable projects where we can draw from, do this process with the local community, try and define what these projects are, and then move into the application round. And I hope that will solve some of the problems we've seen in the past. Alluded to some of that, the projects have been either needed to have a better scope, or more importantly, have been underfunded. We will, of course, plan more about this next week. But I've already talked to a couple of people about this, and we're getting questions about that.
Sounds pretty good. No questions? City expressing interest in revenue sharing again, or are we close to swearing that off?
I don't think we've completely sworn it off, but I think we're still evaluating. We're asking for feedback on this.
Yeah.
I can't tell you one way or the other.
Cool. All right, ZRPC.
I have one update. That's a reminder that the DRPT's transit grant season is open for applications and will be closing on February 1st. So if you have questions about an application, eligibility, or a project, please reach out to me or your transit program manager. That's all I have today.
All right, Jones.
Yeah, so we're wrapping up.
Oh, yes. You can't hear that.
Everything I said that John is, we're on our team. That we've done with the H group, and we're also wrapping up on turn appeals that we've been running in one. So.
And not a strategic, and for you to see my next dimension.
Other sheets. So we probably should read those.
I'm asking this John. Maybe
Yeah, there is like a threshold for.
You. Right, is that?
Go for it.
We're waiting in the corner.
Yeah, I mean, I think previously I talked about gotten orders in for our new electric buses, making a commitment there, planning the logistics of that is ongoing.
Yep.
Upgrades.
Actually, I had a question for you. Have you guys looked at, the street or streetscape as part of your Ivy Road plan? Sure. Taking over Hope Corridor?
Yeah, I mean, part of the master. And then see it manifesting already at the intersection. Improving the soil condition, going up to the IRC there, pulling that clouds, and wire sidewalk.
Yep.
Get some usability, kind of out of the middle of the sidewalk. Extensive on the other development side. Some of that's integrated with smart scale project, not all of it. There's that footage.
Cool. Sounds good. And I guess to the side of that, we're supposed to get our first draft of the zoning rewrite. Actually. Yeah, so. Get exciting from there. That's that. Yeah, anyone else have any updates? Am I missing one? All right.
I'll update the TJPDC's transportation plan starting next week. We will be fully staffed and then we'll first time sometime. We're very excited about it. Scarpignato, Curtis Scarpignato.
He's not local.
Uh,
We did not poach him for anything.
Shout it out.
I think it's early. I think it's earlier.
All right, and then, I guess. Sorry about that, oh yeah, that's clear. Do we have any members of the public who would like to speak? Mr. Tubbs, looking at you,
He just reported.
just listening. All right, how's that? If no one has anything else, I believe we can adjourn. Thank you for coming out.